Jake, I'd love to get a sense from you from your interactions with your constituents, other people in your province, and throughout the region. How is the cost of living crisis playing out in your neck of the woods?
Well, Tony, I mean, where I live in Atlantic Canada, in rural New Brunswick, Miramichi, Grand Lake, people are burning oil, and they still have wood heat, oil furnace heat. We don't have the luxury of natural gas lines to hook up to, um, and largely because we're very rural. But in Atlantic Canada and in Miramichi Grand Lake, people are struggling because the average income for a family here is $34,000, and you take the cost of fuel, cost of home heating, cost of groceries, cost of rent, everything everything in our country is going up with inflation. The government continues to print money while they blame it on a global phenomenon, but essentially we've always had some inflation, somewhere from 1 or 2% over the decades, over the years. You're seeing inflation of 7 and 8% and more and greater, with no sign of it slowing. And I think in places like in New Brunswick, where the economy in New Brunswick is always it's always a struggle. We never wake up in the morning and say our economy is through the roof in New Brunswick. I've never heard that. Now I'm 44 years old. There might have been a day when we could have said that. We had a very booming forestry industry. We had many decades of prosperity just with forestry alone.
Hmm.
But times have changed, and the government is trying to convince people in rural New Brunswick to drive electric cars. We don't even have a lot of places to plug them in. Like, I'm serious when I say this. You order an electric car, it takes 18 months to get here. And then when it gets here, it's half broken because the lithium's controlled in China and we're not managing that properly. Then they have nowhere to plug the car in once they get it. So the government of Canada is so out of touch with rural Canada that, quite frankly, it will shock me if they even remotely do well in the polls next election in Atlantic Canada. They're so out of touch with rural Canada that it's hard to even put into words. And these costs are crippling families. It's putting young people out of the prospect of buying a home. Some of them are living with their parents, and with no hope in sight. Red tape and bureaucracy and municipal gatekeeping in the way of housing development. It's tough to watch. And as the MP here, I'm forever trying to speak the language of the rural Canadian because I am one. I understand the struggle, and it's my job to speak the language of the rural Canadians that I represent here.
And are you getting a sense that, I mean, this sounds like very common throughout the country. If we were having a conversation with a rural British Columbian or a Manitoban or an Ontarian, same kind of things. Are you getting that sense as well?
I get the sense from my colleagues in caucus that it's all over Canada. Even the urban areas. Like, you live in an urban area, you got a pretty decent economy, you've got great internet, great options for fiber cables and mobility. There's a lot of benefits to living in an urban area, but the cost in Toronto and Vancouver is gone through the roof. And people in urban areas, there's always been some great perks to live in urban Canada, but now the cost is through the roof. And so if a rural Canadian, if we're struggling with the cost, we don't have the same level of service, we don't have the same internet capability, we don't have the same specs that you would get in an urban part of the country. But our costs, the thing that's the same is both areas cost is going up in both areas, whether it's urban or rural. And I think the Trudeau government, where they're getting it wrong is that they continue to print money, but then they don't believe they're a part of the problem. And I mean, I'm not a leading Canadian economist. Okay, I'm a member of Parliament. But I can tell you right now, if Trudeau wasn't Prime Minister, and if he hadn't been Prime Minister for the last 3 or 4 years, do I think inflation would be the same number as it is today? I don't. I believe that a better fiscal manager of the country, we would have a lower rate of inflation. I still think it would have been tough through
Right.
COVID and some of the things we've experienced. But I think that he's printing it too much. And
Right,
I
right.
think that's contributing to the problem we have.
Indeed. Jake, we're going to have to take another brief break. We'll be right back after these messages with our guest, MP Jake Stewart.